Well, hey folks, we're here today for another short lecture on property for our online class, Property 108, which is Para 108, And I'm Rob Dawalt at me.com, or you can look at the syllabus like I've said before, and always give yourself an ample opportunity to find my phone or my other email, and you can get in touch with me any way you need to. I'm always there for you. Property 4 is a little bit different. It is quite lengthy, actually, as far as the material, and I may not be able to cover it in one sitting. I may have to talk about this later on the other. I want to apologize to you, too. This week has been really bad because there was, as many of you know, a lot of problems with Blackboard. So I think we got that resolved. It's working well. At the time, I couldn't even get Blackboard to open. So we've been working on just trying to get the basic things going again. So this is something like an enhancement. It's really difficult to do this without the, really good Blackboard support that you need. So I'm able to do this now, so we'll try to get caught up here today. Objectives of this presentation are that we want to talk a lot about building codes, zoning, basically eminent domain, subdivision, and restrictions. So I'm going to hit some of these a little more than others, but I'm going to try to cover all that. The second part, which we're going to do in a different presentation, will be on private encumbrances. Okay, so, and those do come up in this section, so it's important that we talk about both, but I just don't think these are supposed to be short videos, and I did one in contracts last semester. It ended up over 30 minutes long, and people were complaining. So I'm going to split this into two, and we'll get it to you. So what we're really looking at is right now public regulation, which what we're talking about on public regulation. Let me see if this marker works. These are all the things that a good instructor does before he even turns the camera on. And so when we look at public regulation, we primarily mean zoning. Is one of the big, that's the day-to-day, comes up all the time. And so that's the big issue in a lot of these. And zoning, what is zoning and why is it important? And many people under the Constitution, they argue, well, this is infringing my right to do what I want to do on my property. Well, where is zoning most prevalent? Well, it's prevalent in an urban setting, okay, urban setting. And the problem that you get into with a lot of these zoning issues is that people build fences on their neighbor's property. You know, they're living on a half lot in some little small section of town, which back in the 30s or something like that, you could build a property even on a 1/3 of a lot. And so today they would never allow that under zoning because they want more room. You need a little more elbow room even in the city. Although there's whole other parts of zoning that relate to residential spaces. Should they be single family? Should they be multifamily, which is apartments? Should they even be condos? So you get into a lot of issues about your zoning. Is it R1, R2? And so when we say R1, that means residential single family. R2 means duplex. R4 is basically just anything goes on apartments, condos, that type thing. So, and as you get along into it, some cities have a little bit different kind of rules on zoning, but, that's one thing. Well, one of the important things to know is most of your counties in Indiana especially have what they call a master plan in the zoning commission. Zoning commissions represent the city or the county. A lot of counties now, the smaller towns especially, they just have countywide zoning. They don't even have a city zoning commission. That can be very unfavorable for cities, though, because a lot of your county zoning commissions, they put farmers on there, so they try to orient everything on protecting the farmer, which is nice, I suppose. But if you have other people that live there, it gets to be a problem. Like, for instance, you got a zoning commission that allows one of these CAFO, which is a corporate farm, to move in next to somebody that has just lived in this house for their whole life. They love their neighborhood. There's nobody hardly around, but you can be a mile away and smell pig poo constantly. The water runoff from the catch basins and stuff that they have around these, where they're confinement operation, where they slam a lot of pigs into a small space. They can't keep control of the urine and the feces. And so if it rains real hard, a lot of times that'll run down the road, down the ditches, and it'll end up landing on the neighbor's lot that, bought that home 20 years before. So the problem you get into is there's just a basic kind of war that goes on between suburban dwellers that were there before they put this new CAFO type farm in there. And so a lot of people, there's just a lot of fighting going on. This is in the rural areas of the United States. In the urban setting, what you get into is density. You get too much density. And so density, not good. Density, not good. Okay? And that's really, if you stop and think about it, same thing. In other words, you need more R2, okay, and less R4, okay? So that's the problem that you get into. Is you have to have a hearing for any of these changes to be made, but you'll have a guy go in and say, well, I want to make this R2 into an R4. There's enough land there, I feel like I could put at least 4 apartments on there. And so they try to get an exception to the master plan of the zoning. And the zoning commission, depending on who it is, may say yes or they may say no. But if you're against it, you've got to go in. If you're the neighbor, you've got to go in and you've got to argue against it. Same thing goes on these CAFO type things. So we'll mark that out and put the CAFO is the rural bugaboo right now. Another big thing right now that's going on around here is the wind turbines. Wind turbine, like the windmills, these big massive windmills. People are dead set against it in Indiana. And it's kind of a shame in a way because it's jobs, it's money. But it's a balancing act. Again, when we're looking at our Constitution, everything looks back to the Constitution. What are our rights? We should be able to privately, quietly, peacefully enjoy our property, whatever it is, whether it's urban or whether it's rural. So the problem that we get into way too often on this is that we kind of lose sight of the trade-offs that you have to make. That, yeah, it could be good for this guy to build this apartment complex in here, make a lot of money. It's going to give jobs to people, carpenters and people like that. But it can be very bad for the neighbors because a lot of your renters, as it turns out, are not very good caretakers of their property and so forth. And so this can be a big issue. Now, this is not just always true of them. There's people that can move in and cause a nuisance next door to you. And that can kind of get more into the private part that we're going to talk about next, okay? So what we're looking at here is that, all this has to be done with the use of what we call due process. Well, where does due process come in when we're trying to hash out these zoning problems, these CAFO problems, these density problems? Well, it's under the 14th Amendment, okay? The 14th Amendment specifically says that all citizens of the United States are entitled to due process of law. So I don't care if you're getting kicked out of school. I don't care if you're, getting your neighbors trying to build an apartment building right next to your house. You have the right to go to court and complain. But in order to do that, a lot of these administrative law situations, like zoning, require you to first go through a process where you have to first talk to the zoning commission and argue against any changes that they want to make in the master plan. So these are very important, and I worked a lot in the area of city law as a city attorney, and so, this can be very big. Well, one of the things that your author says in the book is that one of the things we have now modernly is all city codes, the master plan, a lot of these notices and so forth are being posted on the internet. Now, the last time I checked the law, and I don't know if it's changed since, but you have to put all zoning notices in the newspaper of general, basically, subscription. So in other words, anybody can buy the paper. It's freely available to everybody. You also have to post it in public buildings. Well, they just post it in City Hall a couple places. Who goes in City Hall, unless you got a traffic ticket? So basically, what they're doing now is trying to make that more apparent and transparent and put that posting requirement to include the email and include the online websites and so forth. So very important. So a lot of this is, we've got these due process requirements on any kind of zoning and zoning changes. Now, one of the things it says is that in the Constitution, there's another part in the preamble. It says, support the general welfare. So you're trying to support the general welfare of all people. So if these zoning changes would support the general welfare, then they would be constitutional and probably be allowed by the state and the courts. Because if you're not happy with the outcome, after you've had your due process, you had your rights, you went to the zoning commission, you said, no, I don't want this to happen. They listen to you, then they said, well, we understand a few people are going to be harmed by this, but we think for the greater good of the whole community, we really need this housing project. So if they did that, then probably that's going to go through if they can show that it's good for the larger community. Okay, so one of the things you get into, though, is if you lose the free enjoyment of your property, that is also considered a taking. So you don't want to have them take your property by ruining it for you, that you don't want to live there anymore because they put this apartment complex in, or they put this CAFO in a rural setting if you live in a rural setting. So these are issues with zoning, and here again, you can always appeal that to the courts if you're not happy. Now, sometimes there's even bigger issues. Let's say that the county has a rule that says nobody can put a junkyard within so many feet of the city limits, okay? Or a city zoning board has that kind of a rule. No junkyards in the city of whatever, Marion, Anderson, Muncie, Evansville, whatever. Well, and someone comes in and they go to the zoning board and they say, well, we'd like to put in a car storage facility. Now, well, what is a car storage? Is it like a parking garage or what? Well, no, these cars are going to be in need of repair. Okay. So then we investigate a little bit further. The city goes out, they look at one of their other facilities. It's a junkyard. Now they're trying to use, smart thinking and the language and semantics to change the wording from junkyard to car facility, car storage facility. Okay. Well, that didn't work. We had that come up in Marion. I got sued. The court entered a judgment against me for $160,000. I'm still standing, so you know what that means, that the Indiana Supreme Court overturned the jury in that case and said, no. These other guys had their day in court in all the hearings that they had, and they can't turn around and sue because we violated their right to have their junkyard. So, some different other cases that you ought to look at. Here's a case 486 Atlantic 2nd, 102. I think it's in Maine. It's a 1984 case. It's talking about a roof deck on a non-conforming structure which violated zoning laws. That's something you can look at. That's Shackelford and Gooch versus Town of Kennebunkport, Maine. Okay, so they probably tried to put something up there where they could view the ocean or something, and they said, no, can't do that. Other building code things. We can get into public health and welfare, and we did, and I've been on both sides of this issue. For one thing, a lot of times you'll have nuisance abatement. I could run down the street down here and get you some pictures. I'm only about a block away in Anderson, unfortunately, and I can show you a half dozen junk houses around the campus here, so it's nasty. But anyway, each city is supposed to have a nuisance abatement officer who's kind of like a police officer and has certain regulatory powers. The problem that you get into with a lot of these people is that they go in on people's property without a warrant. They go in without any kind of a court order. And so, if a visual inspection from the street shows no defects, then they can't just walk in your house and say, we got to look around. We got to look at your wiring stuff. Now, if you're building a new house, that's totally different. Here again, because if you're living in that house and you got your doors closed and locked, nobody can come in. I don't care if they're police. I don't care if it's nuisance abatement. I don't care who it is. Now, I've seen cases where the nuisance abatement guy walks in and walks around the house and looks in the windows, and they see garbage and baloney, crap, junk, pizza boxes, food, dog feces, all this stuff inside this house through the window. They're not allowed to do that. Okay? You cannot do that. You can't walk off the sidewalk and walk up to somebody's house and look in the window. Unless you're invited to come up there, you're not allowed. You're not allowed in the house. Okay, so here again, that's your constitutional right to due process and freedom under the 14th or the Fourth Amendment from search and seizure, illegal search and seizure. So there has to be some kind of a court order. Now, in some cases, they've said, for instance, if your house is on fire, the fire department can come in there. Okay, if it's an apartment complex, inspectors can come in there. Okay, because you've got renters living in there and you're trying to keep everybody safe. So once again, the will of the majority is going to outweigh the will of one person. So you cannot have that privacy. Only in your own home can you demand that someone show you a warrant before they can inspect the inside of your house. People don't realize that. Now, they have relaxed that in some cases where there is some reasonable cause to believe. Like, for example, someone reports somebody and says, oh my goodness, you would not believe what this house is like. If they've got any kind of string at all, they can usually get some kind of court order or administrative order or something that says you can go in and you can look around in there because it's pretty nasty, okay? So, once again, if they have no notice, no idea, nothing to know about these people, then you're basically saying that they have to get a court order. They can't just go in any house along the side of the street with no basis. You look at a house, lawn's mowed, everything's nice, no junk cars, no junk anywhere. You can't walk in that house. Now if someone's has, reported them and said, oh my God, the kids are in awful shape, there's poop everywhere, then the welfare department and the nuisance abatement could go in under those circumstances with a court order or without in some cases if it's a true emergency. Well, one of the things we also need to talk about, and we're going to get rid of some of this, we're going to talk about the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency. And it's a lot like this. The EPA, they regulate all kinds of things. This is Environmental Protection Agency, okay, EPA. And the problem that you get into now with the Army Corps of Engineers and the EPA, there are these wetlands, okay, wetlands all over. Now in Indiana, the thing what we have here is, and I'm going to have to put up a drawing, so I'm going to have to erase all this. I'll give you a chance, make sure you can write that down. Let's say that the farmer owns this piece of land right here, okay? And then there's a road that goes along like this, okay? Well, what the farmers did way back in the early days, they would come in, this whole property was just covered with trees, okay? So they would cut down all the trees and they would use the tree trunks and they would build them a log cabin right here. So that's a log cabin, okay? And then later on they'd come along and they'd build them a barn right here, okay? And maybe, chicken coop over here and, all this. So this is their home, comes up into here, pull around, this is their driveway, okay? And then what they do is they have all this land out here that's just farmland, okay? So that they can access all this and farm it. But what they found when they started farming this, after they got all the trees off of it, is that there were stones all along through here. So they're trying to plow and their plow keeps breaking or getting dull because they keep hitting a lot of rocks. So one of the things that they did is they go along with another horse and a sled, and they pick up all these stones and they pile them in the back, okay? This is what we literally call the back 40, okay? And what ends up happening, this will take a second, but let's run this all the way across back here. So the back 40, this is a 100-acre farm, okay? So we're basically saying that back 40 is covered with stones, okay? Well, what happens? Now, what I'm describing to you happened, let's say, in 1850, okay? 1850, okay? Now, this guy just got this idea. He says, well, I want to get a new tractor and a combine and some new, more modern plows, but I can't even hardly turn them around on this 60 acres that I've got right here, because really it says 100, you got 5 off of here, you got like 55 acres that he can actually farm, okay? So what he tries to do, which these guys are funny, I mean, they'll do some funny stuff. He tries to scrape every bit of land that he can off here to justify having all this new. I just described like $1 million at least in farm equipment. Tractor, a combine's like 500, okay? Tractor, 250, and all the side attachments and everything is at least another. I'm easy going to spend $1 million on this. So how do I pay for this? Well, I got to find some way. So we go out here with a backhoe. Well, what do we find in the back 40? We want a plant back here in the back 40. What's going on in the back 40 here? Well, since 1850, these big trees have grown up between all these rocks, okay? And then what else? Well, there's salamanders, there's little bugs, there's all this other stuff going on in here, okay? So what ends up happening is that water collects between these different rocks, and that's kind of what feeds these trees. But the trees are no good. You can't use them because the roots are all entangled with the rocks that we put back there. The whole area back there, remember, is full of rocks. So what the farmer wants, this is a long story to just tell you a short thing, but what the farmer wants to do, he wants to clear all this off, okay? But what happens is the Army Corps of Engineers and the EPA come in and they shut him down. I'm just putting Corps for Army Corps of Engineers because of this crazy wetlands thing, okay? So wetlands, what they're saying is, what are wetlands? Why are they doing the wetlands? Why is that important? Well, there's a couple reasons. One of them is wetlands help to preserve the land, okay? They help to preserve the actual land from erosion and so forth. Those rocks are kind of like a dam at the back, so a lot of your ground doesn't get pushed off into a ditch or whatever, okay? The other thing is that there's all kind of little animals, like I said, salamanders, tiny fish, bugs, water skippers, things like that help the environment in other ways. There's a food chain out there, and we think we're at the top of the food chain. That's, who knows if that's true or not. But there's plenty of other animals that are in the food chain, and they depend on these things. Like a mosquito, certain birds eat that mosquito, okay? Bigger birds eat the little birds, okay, that eat the mosquitoes, okay? And so on a way it goes up the line, So wolves eat birds, so it's all a food chain, Well, the problem you get into on this is that if you clear all this off, then he can justify spending all this money on this equipment that he really needs to be more effective as a farmer, because he can't grow enough crops fast enough to justify owning all this equipment, and nor can he make a living, okay? That's the problem you get into. You can't just keep pulling a plow behind a horse. It's just not going to work, modern technology. So he says, this is my ground. I bought it fair and square. I want to clear this land and farm it. But the Army says, no, you can't. So what do you end up doing? Here again, administrative hearings at the state and federal level to decide, well, what are we going to do about allowing these guys, to work on this? Well, I will tell you straight up that if it's a natural type of wetlands. In other words, a pond that was there was put there by the glacier. It's like 60 feet deep and on and out, you know, that's not going to be touched by anybody, okay? But if it's some of these type things, and the issue then becomes, well, how long has it been there? And why was it put there? And so, you know, if it's just trash, junk back in there, well, yeah, we'd be better off if we clean that up. So we need to clean that up. So basically that's another part that we have to look at. So basically, you know, that's what we're getting at. So if he gets through this whole thing, and the trend is in favor of the farmer, because they're basically saying, hey, if you don't come up off this, we're not going to be able to make it in this country. We aren't going to have enough, you know, tillable land to feed all the people. And especially as much as we give away to other countries and stuff. So they let them expand back and they take that up. But that is all subject to discretion in hearings. But at the very least, we know this much, that they're going to be entitled to due process to at least argue this point. And so we're going to say, well, hopefully the farmer gets his way on this one. Okay? And if not, then there are probably some pretty good reasons, because there is some natural aspect to this or something that affects it. Now I want to talk about, I'm going to skip ahead and talk about something else, because here again, I think I'm being pressed for time, okay? One of the things on environmental protection is a gas station. Big, big problem, okay? Gas station, okay? And what's wrong with gas stations? Well, we're going to draw you a little picture of the old mom and pop gas station. You guys probably never saw one because you're too young, but when you're a little kid, when I was driving somewhere with my mom and dad, there'd be a gas pump like this, and this would be like a general store, okay? Well, under the ground, this is above the ground, okay? Well, under the ground, there's this tank down here, okay? And this pipe runs up and it's full of oil under here, okay? Or gasoline in our case, okay? So what ends up happening? Well, over the years, cracks start forming on here, okay? So what ends up happening, the gasoline starts pouring out, the rainwater starts pouring in, and so it becomes very defective, so it can no longer be a gas station. You go along, you see this, I mean, and so the EPA has really been cracking hard on this, because a guy is basically trying to keep his station afloat, but on the other hand, he's having an adverse effect. And you know, here's our water supply down here is what this is supposed to be, okay? Okay. So it's the age-old story that you get into on here that, you know, utilitarian principles, which is a philosophy that this country is based on, requires that the many outweigh the few at times when it's a situation like this. So if this guy is killing the people in his town by putting oil or gasoline into the water supply, then he's going to have to stop. And he's going to have to pay to fix that, okay? And if he can't pay to fix it, then the EPA is going to fix it, and guess what? The guy can't even file bankruptcy on that. He's just going to be out of luck. So basically, it's just got to be resolved that, you know, those type of things have to be stopped, okay? Now I'm going to come back in a few minutes because I feel like I'm running out of time. I'm going to run and do something else. And then I will go into finishing up the government regulation, and I'm going to go into the private areas of regulation between homeowners and landowners. So be back in a few minutes. I'll talk to you just a real quick minute.